Hello tea friends. We thought we'd make a video about these three magnificent teas because there's a lot to learn and explore, and these are some really precious gems in our collection of teas that we're putting up to raise money to build your tea center, Life Meets Life. These three are all Dian Hongs. They are aged Dian Hongs. It's very rare to come across well-aged Dian Hongs that are stored properly and that have the qualities that we seek in an aged Dian Hong as well. To find some really good quality samples from before is hard because the tea needs to be of good quality. And then, like all aged teas, there's an added dimension that comes into the quality of tea, the quality of the tea itself, and also the quality of the storage. So to find teas that are stored in good ways or ways that we seek is really challenging. And most people drink Dian Hong when it's young as opposed to aging it. Dian Hong means Yunnanese red tea. Dian is the Aboriginal word for Yunnan and Hong is red. Now whenever we come across this issue in our videos, in our magazine, we always correct the difference between red tea and black tea because in the West, what is called black tea is actually red tea. And we feel that since the mistake came from colonial times, from a Western culture, and that in the place and language and culture where these teas were born and raised, red tea is called red tea and black tea is called black tea, the kind of burden is on us to correct our mistake and approach tea and use the nomenclature of the land and culture and place where it comes from and where it was born. And in China, red tea is red tea and black tea is black tea. So this issue is kind of important. It's not our worldwide mission to stomp out all calling of red tea black tea. However, this does have an emotional justification as well, because the producers of black tea in particular are very moved by our attempts to do so, because they feel it's kind of like restoring their local tea culture to the global stage. So it's something to think about when you go to explore tea more deeply, is that what is called black tea in the West is actually red tea. In fact, sometimes you go into shops and it will say black tea in English, and literally the characters underneath in Chinese are red tea. And since that comes from a mistake that began in colonial times, it feels like we should correct this issue and restore honor to black tea in particular, and I guess to red tea as well. And if you look at the color of the leaves, the color of the liquor of black tea, it is black and red tea is red. You understand why red tea is called red tea. Red tea is a very unique genre of tea because it's really the only genre that's not a particular place, a particular varietal, a particular area. It's not it's not limited like the others are. The other genres really, come from specific places, and it's difficult to say how much of what qualifies oolong tea as oolong tea is the varietals and terroir of a place, and how much is the processing. But red tea is really just a processing method. It was invented most likely near Wuyi. There's some argument about that. Legend has it that the emperor's soldiers were passing through because they were going to ambush a rebellion, and they were passing through in secret, and they showed up in the evening to the village as the villagers were withering their tea and said, feed us and take care of us. And so the villagers had to abandon the tea processing and take care of these soldiers, and the tea withered overnight, and that was the first red tea. Other versions of the story have the soldiers even sleeping on beds of tea, and they're rolling around on it, and that's what withered it to very high level. But red tea really comes out of oolong. Red tea is really just the last station on the oolong line. Is what happens when you wither tea much more. Sometimes people say fully oxidized, but it can't really be fully oxidized. It's just very heavily oxidized tea, red tea. And then Europeans liked it, so they continued to produce it mostly for Europeans. In fact, there is some evidence that some areas of China even got red tea processing from Westerners, that maybe the Dutch in particular were just misprocessed their tea and way over withered it, and then people liked it, and then they, others just wanted that same thing from China, and so the Chinese started to produce it for them. But they really originally didn't see it as a high quality tea. They saw it more as something that would happen when you mistakenly produced oolong. But since then, red tea production has spread to every genre of tea. So when you take first flush buds that are ordinarily reserved for green tea, for example, and you process them as red tea, often with much more skill because they're valuable, those buds, you get gongfu red tea. And when you take, you can take high mountain oolong in Taiwan and process it like red tea. And you can take puerh raw material and process it like red tea, and that's a Dian. So any type of tea really can be processed like a red tea and successfully. Whereas some of the other genres of tea, like if you took puerh leaves and processed them like an oolong, it wouldn't come out so well. Or if you processed Wui cliff tea like puerh, it wouldn't come out so well. So other genres really are a combination of like terroir, varietals, processing, whereas red tea is really just any type of tea can be made as red tea. And Dian really just is red tea from Yunnan, which means puerh raw material processed like red tea. Just as with shou, we like our Dian to be a little bit lightly oxidized, because especially if it is using really good raw material. Really good raw material in puerh means old growth trees, it means natural gardens, often either what's called eco-arboreal, which are kind of like man-made, man-tended gardens, but they're left a little bit more natural, or completely wild gardens in the forest. And we want those gardens to be natural and biodiverse, and the material to come from old growth trees. And that material is very precious. And the process of piling to make shou, or oxidizing to make red tea, kind of damages not only the green, pristine kind of flavors of that tea, but also its energy. The forest energy is dampened by that processing, by that heavy processing. In the case of shou, that would be post-production artificial fermentation. The word artificial is just to differentiate it from natural fermentation, which means aging. Artificial just means that the process is sped up. In the case of shou, it's piled and sprayed with water and covered with a thermal blanket and mixed. It's essentially composted. And red tea is just oxidized very heavily, so it's almost it's a different type of piling. It's a piling just after the leaves are picked. It's a very long withering. And both of these processes, when they're done very heavily, they do dampen the forest energy and flavors and aroma of the raw material if it's really good quality maocha. So we like our shou tea to be a little bit more lightly fermented, and we like our Dian to be a little bit more lightly oxidized. And this means also that in both cases, the teas will be more ageable, because since the piling in the case of shou, or the oxidation in the case of Dian was lighter, not only do the forest flavors and aromas and energy shine through, but the tea can transform more over time. And that's really what this absolutely stunning cake is. We call this tea Serenity. And it's a 2008 Dian that our friend made when he went on a trip to Big Snow Mountain, Dashuishan, in Linchang. And he went there in 2008. He made these cakes himself. The reason that we got to make a wrapper for it is just because he didn't make wrappers. It was easier for him to transport the tea back to Taiwan without wrappers, so the cake itself doesn't have a wrapper. But it was made from very high quality, old growth raw material from the forest, and very lightly oxidized. And it's rich and juicy. It's so juicy, in fact, that like all the best puerh teas, one of the signs when you use your eyes that you have a really good puerh tea is the leaves resist the compression. If the leaves are resisting the compression, it means that they're very juicy. They're full of nutrients. If they're dense, they're going to be rich. And so you can kind of see that, the resisting of the compression. So it's a really, really marvelous Dian, one of the best that I've ever had in my life. Certainly in my top 5. Number 1, I would say, is Joy, which we had for a limited time from our own storage. We brought some out and shared. But this tea is of that kind of caliber. Not as good as Joy, but it's up there amongst my favorites. Energy, Joy, Serenity are amongst my favorite Dian Hongs. And this one's been very cleanly stored. So it's got very good storage, clean storage, and the 12 years of storage have lent it a lot of depth and breadth. It's a really wonderful tea. And then we have these 2 loose leaf Dian Hongs that another friend partially donated to help raise money for Light Meets Life, and they are spectacular. One's called Red Cloud and one's called Red Pine. They're both from unknown regions. We don't know where they come from. Red Cloud is more affordable. It's from 2006, and it's a bit more tippy and sweet and delicious and stored a little bit more dry and clean. Red Pine is a 90s Dian Hong. We don't know from when in the 90s. And it does have some storage. But we around here like traditional storage, as long as it's not gone too far. Traditional storage just means that the tea was stored with a little bit more humidity, so it is a little bit more musky. If you don't like that, as my teacher always says, right, the last thing in is the first thing out. So after a few steepings, Red Pine also returns to a sweet, berry, tart, aged red tea flavors. But it's certainly a lot further along than Red Cloud, both because it's a lot older and also because of that push in storage where there's traditional storage. For me, this is the perfect amount of traditional storage. So it's not so far that it's, tasting extremely like, moldy or damp laundry or those kinds of flavors. It's just a little bit of muskiness in just the perfect amount. And it brews up deep and dark and chocolatey and looks almost like a show puerh in the early steepings, and has a really, really powerful grounding energy, amongst the strongest Dian Hongs I've ever drunk. It's really a magical tea. When we first found it, I literally drank it every morning for a week after it came home, because I fell just head over heels in love with it. Red Pine's going to be one of those teas that I hope I get to make friends with for a very long, long time. And we named Red Pine because it's such a magical, special tea. First of all, it's so rare to find a Dian Hong that's this old and this well-aged, and that comes from good raw material and has such powerful energy. It's extremely rare. And we all just fell so in love with it. We thought it was about time that we named a tea after one of our favorite authors and honorary Global Tea Up members, Red Pine. Red Pine is in many ways a pathfinder that has led the way for those of us that live here in Taiwan. He was an expat that lived in Taiwan for many years. Now he's back in the States. He's an author of many very inspirational books, and also a translator that has opened all kinds of Dharma gates for those of us wishing to explore Buddha Dharma. And his translations have been incredibly meaningful in my life and in the lives of countless people around the world. So if you do get a bag of Red Pine, we of course send a bag to him. If you do get a bag of Red Pine, you can raise a cup or a bowl to that brother who has done really so much for so many people. You can go to Amazon and just look at how prolific he was and how many books he wrote and translated. So blessings to him, long life, happiness in his heart, wishing him well. These three Dian Hong teas are magnificent. They're all really spectacular examples of aged Dian Hong, and they all have their charms. Red Cloud's very affordable, kind of a daily drinker, but a little bit, that age has done it really some magic. Serenity is from really old trees and lightly oxidized, so it still carries a lot of the aromas and flavors of puerh, of the forest. And then the age has just brought it really great power. And red pine is really well aged and deep and dark. And in drinking these two, you can also learn a little bit about how storage affects Dian Hong, because this one's much more dry stored than this one. So you can see how humidity affects the storage of Dian Hong, which is slightly different than the way that it affects puerh. So there's a lesson there as well. We hope you enjoy these teas. We thank you so much for all your support that you've given in the past and all the support that you will give in the future. All the proceeds from these teas, of course, go to help build your tea center, Light Meets Life, where we hope very soon we'll be opening free courses again so people around the world can come to Taiwan and learn about all things tea. Thank you so much.